Welcome everyone, I'm the captain, Ross Memphis Pamber. With me as always is my friend and the co-host, the president, Lawrence Gervais. We're broadcasting from Calgary, Region 3 of the Métis Nation of Alberta, part of the historic Métis Nation homeland. We would also like to acknowledge these lands are the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, Tsuut'ina, and Stoney Nakoda, with whom we share this land on the basis of our historical and ongoing relationships. We would like to thank all of our First Nation friends, the Métis settlements, and to all of our Métis brothers and sisters and families. We'd like to give thanks to our elders for their guidance and to Mother Earth for the time she allows us to be here and use and share her bounty. And now, folks, from the captain and the president, let's get the wheel squeaking. Lawrence, it is so great to finally be sitting together with you. Now, the last time you and I got a chance to sit together, I think it was during the vaccine clinic. Now, we were still wearing masks.
Yeah.
We were still sanitizing, which, I know we're still sanitizing our hands and we're still washing our hands. Thank goodness. I don't understand how we ever got away from that prior to the pandemic. That seems like something we all should have been doing. But, you know, the fact that we're finally sitting together so that we can have a conversation and that we're going to be able to share with our guests just where we are today. Mm-hmm. So from Ross Memphis Pambrin, the co-host, and my good friend Lawrence, the president, I am so grateful to be here. Lawrence, why don't you tell us a little bit about where we're at?
Well, yeah, but I mean, first I want to say, it's nice to see you in person and not have a mask covering half of your face, but I definitely remember what you kind of look like. But no, this house is obviously, nobody can really notice by looking, but we're in the Hunt House here at Fort Calgary, which is a fantastic, array of two distinct old buildings that are here. This is the one that was certainly the one that was at the confluence here, one of the original structures from the Hudson's Bay Company. And then, of course, the other cabin that certainly was brought here along the Bow River at some point. But, they're just a year probably after Fort Calgary was built, they were sort of putting cabins in different locations, and Hudson's Bay Company has been on this area for quite a long time, just trading furs and just being here, right? So at the confluence.
So folks, today we are at the site of Fort Calgary. We're in southern Alberta, in the town of Calgary, and we're in a Métis house at this time. This house, as you're pointing out, today we're going to be talking about Batoche. We're going to be talking about some of the things that are happening within our community. We're going to talk a little bit of music, but I think for our guests, you can capture some of it here that we're in the Bun House, and maybe I'll have you explain a little bit about why the name, the Hunt House versus the Bun House was happening. But we're in a building that, though now has windows, probably at the time when they were first built, didn't have a window, this was essentially raw materials put together for the traveling families, or in the case of this, where our colonial past would sort of show that this was part of the fur trading that was happening for our citizens, and that relationship with the English and Hudson's Bay Company, and how things are moved forward. But why don't you talk a little bit about this building and this structure itself? Well,
it's dovetail style joints. So, certainly it's a Red River style, how they lay the logs on. It would have been a dirt floor, usually covered by certainly a rug that was, certainly woven by either a Métis woman or your sister or whatever. Mm-hmm. But there were windows back then.
Well, they didn't start out with those, did they? Or did they actually?
They made them out of actually like either they would do it with a hide or a stomach.
True.
But they weren't as transparent as what a window is now.
True.
Like glass.
But these were meant at the time to move, weren't they? Like we had the trappers' tents, but then when they started moving into where they were having physical structures, weren't we looking at products that were being built so that the walls could be removed?
Not necessarily, no. I mean, at some point, maybe if you wanted to move your cabin, you could easily do that. But some people would just end up building another one with one axe, right?
That's true.
The reason why the dovetail joints are so important because they could actually make a couple stories even.
Right.
And make them quite large. In fact, there's a church, a Red River style church here in Alberta, near Duhamel, Alberta, that's still there from 1870. That's still intact, and it's a pretty fair sized church.
Well, and I have, when I was starting to research a little bit of the older Métis style buildings, and all of a sudden, you realize it's 2 stories, and you think to yourself, well, why not just build 2 of them? But heat becomes the necessity of, well, as it rises, why not instead, live upstairs? Because in a lot of places, when it gets cold, you're protecting your animals. The size of this has probably got to be maybe 15 feet by 15 feet, this little square. When you're here in the wintertime, we all know, folks, the prairies, how cold it gets. When you're in here, you have to be grateful that every seam has been, the chinking has been put in there in order to protect, that you have a good stove that's going to try and keep you warm, because essentially you are just trying to survive until the next season comes.
Yeah, and I think the roof is really, really important. And that thing that you can interchange every now and then, because boards are going to go out, or just whatever you have on top of you, and it's all insulated. So you want to make sure that that's switched out as much as you can, right? So,
boy, and how old do we figure this house is? Are we looking at 120 years?
About 140.
140.
Yeah.
When you think of how many families or people have lived through here, how many of the people responsible for working with Fort Calgary or the building Fort Calgary were utilizing this as their space?
Yeah, well, I think, in our history, it tells us the Hunt House or the Bun House was used primarily for Hudson's Bay Company employees. So they would, do what they needed to do in this cabin and carry on trading, right? So, or building more stuff here in this area. So.
And we are, though I've commented, and again, it's not to suggest that this building was in exactly this position at every moment, but as the legacy that we're trying to protect moves forward, let's talk a little bit about why we're here on this roadway.
Well, I mean, it is along the Old North Trail. So Old North Trail used to go all the way to Benton, Fort Benton in Montana, and go straight up the mountains to the mountainside, right? And this trail was used for thousands of years by First Nations, and then Métis kind of started using it as their cart trail too, right? So, and we kind of shared, back in those days. And then, of course, CPR moved in, and CPR lands just where downtown is here in Calgary, to Northwest Mounted Police coming in. So we've had a relationship here. This is a main trading route, and people call it 9th Avenue here in Calgary, but it actually is a very significant place to
Old North Trail
Indigenous people, and it's called the Old North Trail. Yeah.
Well, and I think as I continue through this journey, and often people assume just because we do a podcast or you have your elected role, or the fact that I'm Métis and Titan, well, I must know all the answers. No. Oh, this is my first time actually getting to set foot in here. So I'm very excited about the fact that there was an allowance for us to come in here, but we're not at a time yet. We're still in the learning and sharing the conversation. I know I don't have all the answers as to how the relationships should be perfected between us and the municipalities, us and the province. But I know that as long as we're having conversation, we are moving forward. And this is an extreme, this house, for example, and the history of that trail are very important. Yes. This is how trade happened. The Métis were opening up the West, these provinces. And then when the CPR came in and said, well, this seems like a pretty good route. I mean, there's tracks here from where the carts have been moving along. Nobody's taking a Métis cart over an unnecessary path, right? People want to follow a good, reasonable path. So all of a sudden, well, why don't we put the railways here? So that relationship and understanding how the Métis were opening up the provinces, I think is really important to share.
Yeah, but also, I look at, it wasn't just got permission to put their railway here. They actually just did it. Okay. So, and it, it's how we look at our history and how we look at what colonization was and the how significant that was to build this railway. We did a study for our car trails here in Alberta and found 54% of our car trails were once 54% of the railways here were once car trails.
Were once car trails.
Yeah, that's right. So,
and, to that point, when we talk about, I was recently in Batoche, and I had never taken that journey. Now, folks, most of you are probably asking yourself, where is Batoche? Well, you make your way to Saskatoon and you go about 45 minutes north. So it's a bit of a drive when you're coming out of southern Alberta, but you head there, and it's the National Historic Site where the 1885 Batoche Rebellion was happening, and Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont were pushing back against the English.
Resisting,
I guess. Pushing back, resisting. I think the proper term.
We call it a resistance. To us,
To us. I think that's a much better term. And, here we are looking at this historic site.
Yeah.
And as a result of, the government wasn't really asking for permission.
No.
They were just saying, this is how it will be. Much like, this is where the railroad is going. This was not a conversation of, hey, do you guys think we could utilize the cart trail? We'll put them right beside each other. It was just, here it goes. And, though I don't want to suggest, I wasn't there at that time. I don't understand all of the relationships. How were those relationships happening within Canada, within the conversation? But the idea that there's a resistance means somebody, was stepping back and saying, I don't know if I agree with this. But I also support the idea that we've connected Canada. So I'm at a bit of a crossroads myself of understanding, as we move forward today, do each Métis person go out there and claim a kilometer of railroad, or do we accept the fact that history has created a bit of a framework as to how the people were here? How do we move forward?
Well, I think for us as Métis people, we just want the narrative to be true and factual and truthful, right? So, when I read a history book, sometimes I can go through it and go, well, no, that didn't really happen. And now I discredit that whole author and that whole book and the whole thing, right?
Right.
And as Métis people, we always red flag as community, because we know, at least ourselves, because our grandparents and parents have told us, the real true story. And, so there's this whole change that's even happening, even amongst history, and this re-education of Canadians to understand what the Métis contribution was in the West.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're a Western people. And we were here prior to Confederation. And when they encroached and moved in, they pretty much took what we made.
Right.
And that conversation is in Ottawa. They know about it.
Yeah.
I mean, they're educated folks. They do know.
And then granted something and then took it away. So being in Batoche, which folks highly encourage you to get back to Batoche. So that was the festival I was recently at, and I got a chance to play with some fabulous musicians. So Memphis and the Grand, Grande. Thank you for that, Lawrence. You always give me a little bit of time. One of the things that I learned as I was at Batoche was you could see the history of the resistance. You could see where the numbers of people that are in the battle itself seem small, but at the time, those numbers are substantial. There was 500 people living in Batoche. There was 300 people, 300 Métis, well, maybe not necessarily all Métis, but in the resistance saying, we disagree with this. But as you look at the land maps, and everybody who was living in that community was provided in their land access to the water, to the South Saskatchewan. All of whatever they may have owned as a piece of land, that makes sense. Everybody was given access. And then all of a sudden the government goes in and says,
here's our version.
Yeah, here's our version now. This person wants all of the water land. Well, what about all the other people? I don't understand. You look at that map and go, this actually makes sense. Everybody shares that right.
That's right.
And yeah, it's eye-opening. It's an awakening in a sense that just says how I still need to continue to learn, our heritage. But this is the reason why this podcast works, because as I learn, as you learn, as we continue to uncover and more information is being shared, we're sharing it with people. I can't expect people who are not Métis or have no familiarity to just know this information. And definitely the schools are not teaching that. So how do I expect that? I think this is the reason our podcast works. We're trying to learn and create the awareness.
Yeah, and shout out to the past generation of Métis that would go there and gather at Batoche, in the 70s and 80s. And I was going there in the 80s when I was a kid and begging my parents to leave because I felt it was a little rowdy for me.
Yeah.
Not like what it is now.
No, it was fun family time. Yeah, it was really great.
But certainly, even the recognition of it being a historic site, and that sort of developed too, right? And, Batoche, it is what it is. I mean, I have an ancestor that's buried there who died, was killed by, the Canadian Army, but after he shot one of the captains, and Donald Ross. And, we always, as family would go and visit and, acknowledge that. But, certainly there's a lot of families out there. And during that time in their resistance, there was Métis on the Canadian Army side shooting at their cousins on the Riel side too. So people always assume that all Métis were supportive of Riel. Well, that's not quite the narrative, right? So,
and see, that's important that we acknowledge the fact that not everybody agreed.
No.
But, you still have to be invited to the conversation.
Yeah.
And when all of a sudden somebody on the other side of it says, well, we think you're treasonous, so we're going to hang you. Well, and you read the articles in Batoche and you read a little bit of that history. They were questioning at the time of their decision going, is this worthy of hanging? Like really all he's done is created a resistance.
Yeah.
And yet, here's what happens.
Well, I think, if you go to, what faltered Riel a lot was what had happened in 1870. He lost a lot of, out east that really controlled the politics, a lot of influence over there when that happened. And then when 15 years later happened, when he came back to fight with Dumont, it was kind of like, well, we'll still discredit Riel and we're still going to build the railway.
Yeah. Maybe if he hadn't left or maybe if he hadn't, but yeah.
Yeah. And that last spike that was driven in Craigellachie, BC by Donald Alexander Smith, well, that was done within weeks of Riel being hanged, right? It was kind of like, this is our final last spike and this is it. We've done it.
We've established. We've connected. We have,
But what they didn't realize, the Canadian government didn't realize is that Métis didn't falter. We're still here. We're still going to be here for more generations, right? So it's probably better off to have that fiduciary responsibility, which Daniels was. And now we're getting more agreements done with Canada, which is good, and we have a better relationship.
Yeah.
But, it wouldn't matter if there was Conservative Party, Liberal Party, NDP, whoever, because I know we're in another election, they still have to respond to the Métis.
They still have to respond. They still have a duty.
That's right.
Yeah. This was a culture, a citizenship, that, we are identifying where there were gaps in responsibility on the government side.
Yeah.
And, unless you bring that to them, the government isn't going out of its way to try and find. It's like taxes.
Yeah.
If you've missed something that you could have asked for as a deduction, they're not calling you to say, oh, hey, you missed this. We could be giving you more money back. No, they're not looking to try and solve. They need people to come to them and say, well, here's where things have been wrong.
Yeah.
And just down from us, let's talk, there's the statue of the Northwest Mounted Police.
Yeah.
Now, what role did they play? Because, interestingly, we talked about the sign, going through the prairies, imagine a city. Well, the fort was here. The city was kind of here.
There was already people here in buildings.
Yeah.
And Antoine Godin was here in 1832, just on the Old North Trail right beside us.
Right.
So, the Northwest Mounted Police didn't, I'm sure, envision a city. They were just coming here to certainly establish themselves and take care of the whiskey traders and boot them out, right?
Which is, ultimately, I guess that's their responsibility. That's what they're hired for. They're not there to dictate what the law is. They're there to.
But also, there was a certain colonization piece too. So it wasn't just whiskey traders, but to say this is a territory now and this is us. It wasn't about building Calgary. There's no way that I could think of that they were doing that. Their intentions are anyways.
By us coming here and the generous allowance for us to utilize this, this hunt house itself and the other Métis cabin that's here are not seemingly celebrated enough. And I think I'm very grateful and grateful Jason on the background for setting up some of these connections and the relationships, and our friends over at Fort Calgary, for helping connect us with this. I'm happy that we get a chance to come out and look at some of these things and celebrate.
Yeah.
Folks, you can't see it, but this is a beautiful moose stew that's cooking right here that we're going to try a little bit afterwards. Well, I wish it was, but
there's probably a few ants in there.
Yeah, actually, there's probably a few ants in this pot. I don't know if I want to eat out of that one just yet.
Yeah, but the one thing that I would like to see here as Métis Nation representative is maybe some plaques, a little bit more to tell the story about these cabins, so people can have their wedding receptions around here, which is beautiful. I mean, the Dean House is very good,
beautiful.
Yeah, but people can walk around while they're out here chit chatting and having the champagne and look at a nice plaque and read the whole story about these cabins.
And I think that's some of the things we have to start asking our supporters to do. And as we acknowledge, the groups that have been there behind us, and I'm looking forward to. We're going to be shooting from the Lougheed House.
Yeah.
And much like when I was recently, again, at Batoche, and the individuals who are working there for Parks Canada, they were not ignoring the government's role. Mm. They weren't suggesting that the government was right. They weren't suggesting the government was wrong. Mm. Well, actually, that's not true. They were sort of suggesting that they can't speak to what was happening at the time, but they would, with honesty, explain the government, this is what they were doing. And it does sound unfair to the Métis population, but they also weren't trying to stand on the side of just defending the Métis or just they were presenting the time, presenting the unique, the challenges that were happening at the time. And I respect that. I wholeheartedly respect the fact that not all the decisions that our leaders, our respected, individuals in the community have made were the right decision. But were they the right decision at the time? And have we moved forward in a positive way? I feel as though we are. And, the Lougheed House is a great example of a proud now Métis family saying, boy, this has a cherished history.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
But you see, I mean, the connection with the Hardesty Lougheed line, of course, goes to Donald Alexander Smith, not so much supporting the Riel side, but that narrative still has to be told.
It still has to be told.
They're Métis just as much as you and me, right? And the Hardesties are acknowledged at that Métis Veteran Memorial at Batoche, even though they were on the other side, and even the one that we have at Métis Crossing, we have a Métis monument there that we talked about last time. Mm-hmm. But it mentions the Hardesties on there too, right? But we all have these stories, and we just have to bring them out into the open and start telling them. Yeah. And I would think it would be a great TV series or a feature film. So if anyone's out there, a producer, here's a great option for you.
Folks, my question to you is, which one of us looks more like Louis Riel so that one of us could play?
So you look like Gabriel Dumont.
Oh, stop it.
And I'd probably be on the other side, I'm sure.
Well, you read the history of these guys when they, were in these resistance and these battles, and, you take up arms, it's a challenge. It is you don't know how things are going to turn out. And again, there's a lot of people buried in Batoche. And right. And I say thank you to all of our soldiers, all of our first line people. We're at a unique time because of the pandemic, but our soldiers have been there for 100 years, and we've had peacekeeping all over the world. They are, these are difficult times as we, reevaluate what did happen in Afghanistan. Did we have any success? Right now in our little world, it seems so far away because we spend all of our time just trying to figure out about COVID and what do we do now? How do we put our kids back to school? How do we manage that? But lots of social programs out there, folks, lots of opportunity to apply for funding for education. But Lawrence, I can't say thank you enough that this might be one of our roles. This is a cherished for me that we get to have these conversations. We got to be grateful that we do get to have these conversations.
Yeah, for sure. And, maybe we can build our own cabin one day, and certainly authentic up, but I doubt it.
My shoulders are already a bit sore.
Maybe a nice film
we'll get
studio.
Somebody to help us out to it.
But maybe a green screen of one. Yeah. But no, it is nice to be here. It's a nice day. It's nice and cool in the cabin, but no.
So, folks, I can't say thank you enough from the Squeaky Wheel. Make sure you take the time to walk through Fort Calgary. They have some beautiful artifacts. I'd like to see us, Lawrence, starting to really dig into a little bit more of the artifacts. As we've done our shows before, we focused on those areas that are the quintessential Métis. But I'd like to looking at 3 different sashes. I'd like to, why they were different, how they why the colors may have been different. We've talked about the flag. We've talked a bit about the food. I look forward to, even though, we've started shooting a few things with our partners at TELUS about actually seeing some of the food. We're bringing this conversation forward, Lawrence. This is fun. And we can talk about parfleche bags, octopus bags, to carrioles, to all these different things that, predominantly are Métis. We're a little bit flashy. Yeah. And a lot of these cultural items are flashy in those days, right? What I'd like to see, folks, and this is just my suggestion, is that we have Lawrence eat nothing but historic Métis food for 1 month. Yeah. So, well, I'd slim down. I know that. You better start, you better start mixing the berries for your pemmican now, and you better get out there and start finding out where you can get moose meat, because it's going to be a long, cold winter if you're spending November eating nothing but historic Métis food. Yeah. And we know with the COVID numbers, it's really hard for us to gather unless we're all vaccinated. Yeah. But, we have events going on, the seniors, they're having their bingo today, and I'm going to head over there and say hi to them. And certainly we're starting a newsletter too with them so they can get informed. A lot of them aren't digital. Yeah. So we have to get a paper newsletter and send it to their homes. So we're starting that. And then getting ready for this Constitution talks. We have a few scheduled down here in Southern Alberta. So we're pretty excited about that. Folks, just like any election, if you want to be a part of this conversation, you do have to get out and vote. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. But, we look forward to seeing who the new prime minister is, or if certainly the incumbent moves back in. And maybe they listen, yeah. But certainly rocks have been thrown, yeah, which is always a sign that some might change, but you never know. No. Right? I mean, we find out with the votes and how many seats are in Parliament. We know when he's at the platform, talking, doing his acceptance speech, and there's counting votes here in Alberta, so. Yeah, we know what's happening in the East. We also we get to hear about it when we're in the West. As I always tell people, folks, I love going East, but I sure do like coming West. I do like living out here. Yeah, and I heard, when Riel was negotiating in 1867, there was a promise of 4 Métis seats in Parliament. But, of course, maybe we should go back to those days. So we should run. That's right. So, yeah, okay. It's Métis seats. Yeah. No, that's fabulous. So, folks, from the Hunt House here in Southern Alberta and just beside Fort Calgary, highly recommended. Thank you for your time here on the Squeaky Wheel. Lawrence, again, thank you for your time. Thank you to our team that's behind us that helps us put this together. Thank you to Jason for running the editing and the programming and the producing of this. And Lawrence, I look forward to our next conversation because I know it's probably only a week away. That's true. And where we'll be, we don't know. It's a surprise. And make sure you click that little button, folks, that says subscribe. Look us up, thesqueakywheel.ca. Make sure you send us any emails that you like. You already know how to reach out to us. And click that little box because every subscriber we get is really important to us. Thank you, folks. From Memphis, from the president, best wishes.